So, hello again. It's me, Paul Woodadge, World War II TV. Really excited about today's show because we've got a bona fide movie star with us today, which is quite exciting. And we're talking about the brilliant new A Call to Spy film. And with me is the writer and one of the stars of the film, Sarah Megan Thomas. So, thank you very much for joining me, Sarah.
Thanks for having me.
Well, it's very exciting. And so we're going to delve straight into the questions. So it's a fascinating story. Anything about the SOE, OSS, resistance is always just a fascinating subject. How did you get involved in it? What was your first moment that you were aware of this story and you wanted to get involved in it?
Yeah, so believe it or not, it actually started with the spy genre. I'm obsessed with spy films. I love them. People tend to like them. They're commercial. They can make money. And I love 1917 and Dunkirk and Charlotte Gray, but where women are involved more often than not, it's a romance. And I was really interested in the independent lens of the psychology of what it's like to be a woman as a spy on the ground. And I studied World War II in college, and actually I played Ava Braun in an off-Broadway play, believe it or not, in New York. So I knew the genre very well and about the SOE, so that's where it started. And I dug into the research and uncovered the women in F section and chose three, Vera Atkins, Noor Inayat Khan, and Virginia Hall, who were pioneers in their field, the first, so to speak, and made the film about them.
And that was my next question was going to be why. I mean, Vera Atkins, I completely get because she's at the head of the organization in terms of the female. But with the agents, you've got an incredible choice of incredibly brave women. We just talked before going on live, Nancy Wake and Violet Zaba and all these incredible people. What drew you to these particular ladies?
Yeah, I mean, like you said, any one of these 39 women in F section can and should have their own movie, and I'm developing a miniseries. So I hope to be able to expand. But the reason I chose Virginia Hall and Noor Inayat Khan to put in this film with Vera Atkins as the recruiter, as you said, is not only because they were the first. So Virginia Hall was the first female field agent put in the field, and Noor Inayat Khan was the first female wireless. But also because, frankly, they were from different countries, different nationalities. They were, quote unquote, outsiders or underdogs. My character, Virginia Hall, had a wooden leg. She was disabled. And Noor Inayat Khan, who's played by the amazing Radhika Atpe, was a Muslim pacifist, so an underdog as well, or perceived as one. And yet they rose to become extraordinary heroes. And I thought by putting these women together in time and space from these different nationalities and religions and showing how they can and did unite to resist this evil would make for a more global story about how we are all in this together and we can unite despite our differences.
Well, absolutely. And I mean, you mentioned the other movies, and we talked before going on live about Carve Her Name with Pride and Female Agents and Charlotte Gray. And, I was thinking about the old Odette film from 1950, which me as a working class English was very it's the posh people involved. I don't feel that it was my class represented. And the fact, as you said, you had a Muslim involved and someone disabled. It's perhaps more broadly appealing than just being about a particular class aspect, which there is a lot of that when you enter MI6 and MI9 and London in the war. There's a lot of posh people involved and a particular dynamic. But did you watch all those other movies? Did you watch those classics and either think I'm not going to do it that way or draw inspiration from? I'm intrigued by that.
I love that question, and no one's ever asked me that. And actually, the answer is no, and there's a reason. I didn't want this film. When you're writing and creating and producing, very easily you can be influenced by other films. And because this was about the SOE and the first film on these women in particular, I didn't want to watch anything directly related as a film to SOE. I did watch a whole load of war films, but not ones directly related to the women in the SOE. For that reason, I wanted to be free to take what I researched and make it my own.
And that makes complete sense. Although I bet you'll go and watch them now,
yeah.
Go and try and catch up on those classics. But that brings me to my next question very neatly, really, which is the research. Because You say you did history at college, but with studying things like SOE, MI6, there's the kind of the archival approach. You go to the archives, you download all the official, or you kind of go to the secondary sources, because there's an incredible amount of books available on these people. So how did you commence your research into this subject?
Yeah, and as you mentioned, there's so much, and you have to figure out what to pick and peel away for this 2-hour film. I used a lot of the archives, so the files for Vera Atkins, Virginia Hall, Noor Inayat Khan, which were fascinating. In fact, in the character I play, Virginia Hall, some of the lines in the movie are direct quotes she said in letters in her spy files. I really wanted to have that integrity. So, for example, there's a line like, it's my neck, and if I get a crick in it, that's my prerogative. Well, she said that, and I really wanted that to be authentic in the film. But then above and beyond that, I spoke with the CIA. Virginia Hall was the first woman to work for the CIA after the war. They opened up their doors, the CIA museum, and then living relatives of Virginia Hall, but then also friends of Vera Atkins. I just got an email yesterday from someone who knew Vera Atkins, who was a research, was helpful in my research, who saw the film and loved it. And so, there were so many people who opened their doors.
And that's fascinating, because just in my little prepping for this show, reading some of my books that are behind me there, without sounding offensive to the older historians, there's lots of the books written in the 50s and 60s where it's written by men, and their impressions of the females are filtered through a sort of sexism. Oh, these pretty little things going off and doing stuff. And you realize that you're not really seeing the true person. You're seeing it filtered through someone writing in the 1950s who's looking at it in a very conventional, oh, it's so wonderful, these plucky little women getting involved in it. And that just drives me up the wall now. It's 2020 now. So, those old books are just thoroughly annoying, how in trying not to be sexist, they are being incredibly sexist.
Totally. Well, even in the files, interestingly enough, Noor's file, she was rated a princess. There is a direct quote, like, if this girl's a spy, I'm Winston Churchill. She's a doll. In fact, there was a fascinating museum exhibit on Noor in New York last year at the Rubin Museum called, I'm going to blank on the name, but it's the Rubin Museum. And it was her files as an art installation that you walk through on how these women were judged, by their files. And even though she was called a princess, etc., they were desperate. They sent her off anyway. She was murdered, but she was so brave. She didn't give, when she was captured by the Nazis, she didn't give away any information. She tried to escape, etc. So that concept, like you're saying, of the stereotype that was assumed of these women, and then when these women went in action, how they proved themselves, is incredible.
Yeah, and that's what I take away from your film. And I'm saying again, I love the film, and my next question is going to be, you've honed in on Vera Atkins and the other two. You're having to dramatically create a situation where two agents are meeting who didn't really spend that much time together, and I completely get that. I understand for the purpose of developing characters you have to do that, and I'll be touching on this later on, but that when I have authors on talking about their books, that combination of maintaining a strict historical accuracy but also telling a story and trying to get people emotionally involved in characters, that's very tough. And I can completely get, and I completely understand why you had these two women meeting and in having a friendship that perhaps wasn't there, but how do you balance that as a writer, and also you're going to be acting in it? How do you balance that? You've got history staring at you there and entertainment and making a drama. How do you go about that process?
That's another great question. I think for this specific film, because it was the first film on some of these women, I had to stay true to the arc of their lives. It was so important to me that if these women were alive, they would feel that this honored their legacy in some way. And I really felt that obligation. And that was like the largest internal conflict I had going through the whole process at all times. But, at its core, it's essentially a five-hander, this film, right? There's two men in the film as well, and Buckmaster, and then Ross of Sutherland plays a composite who was really Virginia Hall's France contact. And what I did was retain the arc of what happens to all of these people accurately, almost 100% accurately. So for example, even though Noor and Virginia never met, what happens to them in the film is mostly what happens to them in real life. Virginia Hall's really famous for a prison break. And that prison break would be, it could be $100 million movie. Like, you couldn't necessarily make that prison break on an indie film, and it would be an entire movie in and of itself. So I wanted to have a prison break in the film. It had to happen, but it wasn't going to be the same prison break because it didn't fit. And so how's she going to do it? Well, then I did the research on how the SOE did prison breaks elsewhere. And they did use Monopoly games, which is in the film. So I took a little fact from over here and put it into the character and retained the arc. The same with Noor. Like, you see her come to Lyon. She's there very briefly before she goes to Paris, right? She was never in Lyon. And then she is captured. She tried to escape twice. We see that. Her last words were liberté when she was killed. We see that. So retaining the arc was what was important.
No, and I get that. I mean, I was reading other books. I was like reading Marcus Binney's book, Women Who Live for Danger, last night. And Virginia and Noor are both in the book, but in completely separate chapters, because that's how you do a book. You say, here are 10 women, chapter 1, chapter 2, and you could have done the movie like in 2 halves, like a part 1 and part 2, or part 3, in fact, because you've got Vera as well. But I can completely get why you need to merge the stories together, and I have no problem with that. And it's interesting you mentioned the French characters, because they're mostly composites, aren't they? They're mostly a little bit of that, a little bit of this kind of brought together, because otherwise you'd have a cast of 200 speaking roles, and then it would get confusing. So your British characters are largely true. The Germans, interestingly, also are real, but the French get a bit sort of merged. And so tell me how you work on that broad kind of taking a lot of characters and bringing it down to the right amount for it to work in a film.
Sure. So the lead French character, as I mentioned, played by Ross of Sutherland, is based on a real character, codenamed Pepin, but a composite. And I changed the name to Dr. Chauvin. The real guy's name was Dr. Rousseau, because he was a composite. And you don't want to put someone's name on it when you change so much. But Dr. Rousseau, the historical person, really was crucial to Virginia Hall, her ally in helping with the circuit. And he was captured and he was tortured. And so, again, I'm wanting to keep the base factual. But then there's a character like Robert Alesh, and that's factual. Like, if you Google Robert Alesh, he betrayed Virginia Hall. He was a priest. He did all those things. And then when you do get to France, again, I did kind of the general research, and I wanted to have both sides of the resistance, because you do see a lot of portrayals of the French as they just kind of laid down and let the Nazis walk in. And I think that's just an oversimplification of human beings. And so I wanted to show kind of both sides. You see with, the person who turns Noor in, that was a fiction, right? That wasn't the real person who turned Noor in, but I wanted to show that people were starving and who did it for money. Now, that's not to say it was a good thing or the right thing, but there was at least some kind of reason, not just like being some blanket evil person.
Yeah, I mean, and I live in France. My partner's French. My friends are French, and I think Hollywood and the UK have a tendency in any movie set in France to rather oversimplify the whole thing, and the people are either an out-and-out baddie or they're an out-and-out goodie. And the reality is 95% of people living in occupied Europe were just trying to survive day to day and gauging the situation on that daily basis. And, sometimes if you need food, you might have to give a bit of information for that, or you do something and you're making decisions. And that complexity doesn't often get carried through into conventional Hollywood movies. But I think you did that, again, very, very well. And, but I'm talking about authenticity, and I like the Tom Hanks quote. And Tom Hanks, who produced and was directed 2 episodes of Band of Brothers, said there are 2 types of authenticity. There is one that says all the buttons are correct and all the ammunition is correct and all the buildings look like they looked in the photograph. That's a relatively easy thing to accomplish. The thing that's much harder is literally the motivations and the nature of the interplay between the characters. And I think that's a really good way of breaking it down, because there are the train spotters and stitch counters who watch a movie and go, yeah, that's the wrong truck for 1943. That's the wrong pattern uniform for that. And actually, I know a bit of that stuff, and you were really good. That movie nothing stood out to me as being good. The hair was good. Everything was good. But the character side of things, you have to move people a bit and say, okay, they didn't actually meet in this town on that day, but in order to drive the narrative, what I would like to do that again, that we've kind of touched on that, but balancing that, and also you're starring it. We haven't touched the fact as that, well, you're writing it, you're writing a role for yourself, you're writing the role of the other two people, you've got history. It's a lot of hats to wear there, figuratively speaking. And interesting, did you have any rewrites on set, or was the script done and you filmed what you wrote?
Well, I had tons of rewrites on set. In fact, I was rewriting all the way through post-production, because you have test screenings and certain things aren't clicking, and you have to like do voiceovers to get like what history audiences know from World War II, and you don't have to spoon feed's the wrong word, but educate them on, in terms of especially an American audience, because this is an American film. So there were rewrites all the way through. And then also as an actress, frankly, I think it's very important to listen to the actors that are playing the roles. And if a word or a line doesn't feel natural to them, you don't want them to try and say it. So it's a lot of collaboration. I will say, to the Tom Hanks quote, I slightly disagree, and I love Tom Hanks, but I will say it is extremely challenging to get the details right on an independent film. In other words, it's one thing if you're 1917 or Dunkirk and you have these multi-million-dollar budgets. We did not. And so actually the biggest challenge on this film, which is, I'm not at liberty to say what the budget is, but it's tiny. I mean, it's tiny. You would be shocked. Was to get the authenticity on the money we had to make the story. And to do that, we had to shoot in Philadelphia and Budapest instead of London and France. In fact, we shot the Pyrenees in upstate New York on a snowstorm. I mean, so I would say that, like, that was actually the biggest challenge, and maybe the biggest challenge to getting more of these stories out there, because on the independent film level, you can make a modern story very cheaply. You just can't do that when it's a period film.
No, that's very true. And yeah, Tom Hanks had an awful lot of money on Band of Brothers, as he did in Saving Private Ryan. And I watched the movie twice now. The first time we watched it, I was with my partner, Mag, and Mag's best friend, Sophie, lives in Lyon. So as soon as Leon appeared, we're going, that is Leon, isn't it? And she was going, I'm not sure. I said, no, it looks like Leon to me. And I walked those streets. I walked where the little restaurants are. I said, no, that's Leon. No, it isn't. Oh, I think it is. And we Budapest in the end. But I mean, you managed with the railings and the stonework and stuff. There were times I was completely convinced you had a camera in Leon. So well done on that. Fantastic. You made that money go a long way. But going back to the characters, and I touched on it earlier. The organization of SOE was all about everybody was pretending to be something they weren't. I mean, even Vera Atkins herself was pretending to be a sort of educated upper class when she was a British person, when in fact she was Romanian. And you touched on that. And I noticed the fact you had her act giving pronunciation of some English words in a slightly odd way early on. I thought, she's saying that in a funny way. And I thought, oh yeah, because she's not actually English, isn't it? That was very clever. I like that bit. But the files that everybody is pretending to be someone they're not. So how do you get into Noor's personality? How do you get into Vera and Virginia? And because Virginia was very private, wasn't she? She didn't do interviews after. You met some of her family though, didn't you? Her relatives. So
I didn't meet them, but I spoke to them on the phone. Yeah, absolutely. And actually the individuals in the CIA facilitated that, which was incredibly helpful. And that was the challenge, right? So you have the facts, you have some of the facts, right? Because the files may be inaccurate, et cetera. Who knows what was thrown out, right? But you have the basic facts, but how do you get to the internal, which is what this movie is as an independent film? You have to be interested in the characters. Will they or won't they live? And with Virginia specifically, she gave no interviews. Well, all of them, they're spies, right? So they're not going to tell you who they are or what they're feeling. And even after the war, Virginia Hall didn't talk about it. She won the Distinguished Service Cross and she wouldn't let the president give it to her because she didn't want to blow her cover. It was done in secret with her mom. So, for me as the actress, speaking with her family helped in terms of her personality, not in terms of what she was saying, but her spirit. So for example, they would tell me stories like she always played the male roles in the plays. She was the pirate chief. She was most original in her yearbook. She wore a snake bracelet to school for fun to make people laugh. All these kinds of, she called herself cantankerous, and then they also were able to tell me how she was always in pain with her leg, which was something that I needed to internalize. And that really is what I used to inform her character. She was someone who didn't wear emotion on her sleeve. She would cover, and that was helpful.
And you took the leg literally, in that you ended up genuinely having problem with your own leg, if I understand correctly. So you took that method acting to a extreme level there with pain for walking in a funny way. You ended up with a pain in your leg. Is that right?
Yeah, worse than a pain.
Crazy.
So basically, for like for a year, I was, because not even just when you were shooting, to get the leg was part of her character, right? She shot her leg off in a tragic hunting accident. She had a wooden leg. She named it Cuthbert, which is, you know, a soldier and a performer of miracles. That name, which I think is a really interesting. I don't know why she named Cuthbert, but I put that in there because it's fascinating. But that is part of who she was, and I had to understand it. So I would limp and walk a certain way, even like when I had my producer hat on, even when I was acting with someone else and not on camera. And then I had this heavy wooden contraption on my leg, and it weakened my Achilles tendon, which completely ruptured. And I needed surgery, and I had complications from surgery, and I got a pulmonary clot, and I almost died. And I honestly, my leg will never be the same. Ever. You know, I won't be able to, I'm a big athlete in real life, and that's just over. And I will say that I have so much more respect. I don't even know if you could have more respect, but when you have a disability, and mine was short term in terms of being in a wheelchair, et cetera, people look at you differently, no matter who you are. And I don't think I fully realized that, because I'm a confident person, and I can only imagine now what Virginia Hall went through every day of her life, trying to not have people judge her on her disability.
Yeah, and that would have worked, I'm sure, the same way with Noor being played by an Indian actress, bringing that idea of being an Indian, moving from the kind of Bollywood world to the English-speaking world, of being the outsider again, because that must play into things as well. The actors must have contributed in their own sense, their interpretations of what it is like to be slightly misfitting to a situation. And absolutely. Yeah, that came through as well. So yeah, but yeah, with these people, and particularly when we're talking about Vera Atkins and Maurice Buckmaster, because they have been portrayed in the films before, but without much nuance. And the thing, as a kind of a historian, I particularly liked about what you accomplished with A Call to Spy is that you had the characters admit that SOE took a long time to become the efficient organization it was by the end of the war. You know, Churchill has the idea, let's set Europe ablaze, blah, 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 we'll go and kill people, do stuff, it's great. And for the first couple of years, when Virginia was involved particularly, it's really finding its feet, and it's finding its feet very slowly, and people are dying, and resistance lines getting broken, and the Gestapo infiltrating them, and they're learning by their mistakes. And I think, you know, you say you haven't watched those old classic movies, but in the classic movies, you don't get that arc of the SOE being, in a sense, a failing organization before it became a successful. I would never say quite as strong as failing, but you know what I mean? That early 41, 42 period, they're inventing the rules. It's like this dealing with COVID now. We're 6 months into it. We're kind of understanding the rules of the game a little bit better now than we did back in February and March. And I think with SOE, they're rewriting how wars can be fought. And so I love that conversation you had with Vera and Maurice, saying, you know, that we've made some mistakes, because that hadn't been done before. Did you kind of debate doing that, showing a weakness among these characters, or was that important to you to show to an average audience that the SOE is it took a while to become established?
That was really important to me to portray. In fact, most of the film takes place in 1941, 1942. And most of the film takes place when America's not even in the war yet, right? And we're losing. The Allies are losing. And what I was interested in exploring as a filmmaker is the concept of signing up for something when it could be a failure. Like, you know, you might want to go work for the CIA or the MI16 when you know they're powerful and can be successful, and you know the risks, but what you're working for is established. And the SOE was a new organization, the Baker Street Irregulars, you know, nobody knew what they were doing. You know, Maurice Buckmaster, he worked in France for Ford Motor Company. Like, he wasn't a spy master. And so there's a lot of controversy on whether or not what they did was right, and what, did they just put agents in as an experiment, and were they casual with human lives? My perception is that it's really easy to look back and judge. They had no choices. They were losing a war and they were throwing spaghetti at the wall. And the alternative was the whole world being taken over by the Nazis. So I wanted to portray the mistakes that they made, and maybe were not good mistakes, and they did maybe, but also the challenges of having no idea what you're doing and trying to save the world.
Yeah, I mean, when I read, online, whenever you read about Buckmaster, they always make the parallel to he's M in the Bond films, and Vera Atkins is kind of a combination of money and this, and that annoys me a bit, because by the time I'm going off on a tangent about James Bond there, but by the time the world hears about James Bond, those organizations have been operating for 2 decades, and they've got better at it. The thing is, Buckmaster is doing it when, as you said, there's an empty office with, how are we going to do this? How are we going to take war to Europe? There's no previous experience you can draw on. There's no previous boss you can ask, how did you do this? They have to invent everything from the beginning. And of course, as you mentioned there, that all these agents who went off, they absolutely knew the risks of what they were taking on board. If they didn't know the specifics of the danger, they knew, of course, it was a high risk operation and they may not come back. And I love the way you dealt with Noor's, pacifism, and with her mom, and that why she's doing it without saying why she's doing it, without saying why she's doing it. That I thought was beautifully done. But yeah, it is debated about what SOE really achieved. And I'm going on talking about my other shows now. I don't like those kind of history books where we just analyze all the things that went wrong, and this could have been better, and that could have been that we should have done this, and why didn't we know that? Because that's just Monday morning quarterbacking. So the point is, these people were trying to bring something. They were trying to thwart the Nazis, and what they did took a while to get to become established. But so with the this idea about the locations and how did you establish Lyon and those kind of places? Did you look at Google Street View? Did you look at wartime archives? Do you just a question of finding what you could find today and seeing how it could match? I mean, how do you go about that? Did you do that work? I mean, obviously you had location people, but
well, I did a lot of location work, but also I sent our director went to Lyon. And, so she went to Lyon and she walked the streets exactly as you said, because you have to get it right. And saw all the images and brought back pictures. I've certainly been to France myself as well, but she was the one who went and kind of did that research. With the locations, Budapest was just perfect because, frankly, a lot of the stuff is not restored there in the way it is. So it's older, it's more archaic than France itself. You don't have to do builds. We didn't do a lot of builds on this movie. For the London, well, not even for the London, in Philadelphia, I found an estate called Ardrossan Estate, which, if there are like movie lovers out there, it's the real life inspiration for the family in the Philadelphia story. Right. And they're Scottish in ancestral, right? And the home on the suburbs of Philadelphia is a replica of their Scottish mansion, fully furnished period furniture. And the spies historically trained in mansions in Scotland. So right there on the main line, just by securing that location, we got to shoot, what is a replica of where these spies trained. And then what we did for indie filmmaking is the basement, we dressed for the torture scene. The third floor we dressed for when Noor gets caught in Paris. So we didn't have to do a lot of moves, which was another thing that was really important in terms of, bringing this in on an indie budget.
Well, I mean, I think that, the indie budget as well, because Mag and I, we watched it, even though we're kind of history based, you still can't help as a viewer of films giving it your kind of what you look at when you watch normal films. And I was thinking about the Brad Pitt, Marion Cotillard film Allied, and clearly you didn't have the budget to have massive, great set piece train explosions, aircraft coming in, Spitfires, parachutists coming in. But actually, I think that worked in your advantage, because when you read about the SOE, a lot of their work is actually not boring. It's essential, but it is just going on a street, leaving a message for someone in a dead letter thing, moving on, waiting, moving on again, standing there waiting to meet someone else to pass something on. It perhaps doesn't make good entertainment, but it is actually what these guys did. And I really love the scene in the restaurant with the bar of soap, because that was something incredibly important. And the fact that poor old Noor, when she was in Paris, was sleeping in doorways. And because I think, again, these old classic movies, there's a romantic idea. They're living in farmhouses with lovely cuddly old French ladies giving them baguettes and fresh eggs every morning, and that they're in the same place. And of course, that's not what their life was. Their life was jumping from one hot spot to another. And I think you did that very well. And the grubbiness, I think, is the word that came to me about being an agent. It's not, there's not very much glamour involved in having to wash in a gutter and run for your life from one place to the other. So that I think you did very well on.
Well, I'm really glad you brought that up, actually, because that was the major challenge on the film. In other words, for example, I just did a panel with CIA personnel last week, and their chief historian said, I don't think people will realize how historically accurate this is, and how Hollywood tends to do what you were just saying, these major blowups, etc., when the reality of a person working in the field is it's the little things that gets them caught, like looking the wrong way when you cross the street, not having the right accent. And that was important for me to retain the integrity of what it is to be someone in the field. The downside of that is that you do have a feature film where it's all about the little actions. There isn't, one battle like D-Day, there's just lots of little things. And I think, that's something that is non-traditional. And I hope, audiences embrace that, it is it's about the little things. And that's true to the story.
I mean, you said it was an American produced and created film, but actually it felt very European to me. It felt more, there was a best-selling series in France, Une Village Française, where it was like 7 series, all about a fictitious village in France from the late 1930s, all the way through World War II, right to the 1946, 47. It went through that whole complexity of collaboration. And if a German turns up at your doorstep and says, you must feed my troops, and you don't, you get a bullet through the head. But if you say yes, are you collaborating? But there was very little set piece action in that series. It was a real slow, but I forget how many episodes it was. It was like 90 or 100 or something. So people had to kind of sit with it and invest in it to get the payoff at the end. And I think, and I mean this in no way as a criticism, people have to sit and invest in your film, because you're not going to, hang on, it's 15 minutes in. Why have we had a beach landing and a parachute jump and 14 aircraft crashing into a cliff? And I really liked the fact you didn't do that. And as I said, I think the grubbiness of it being an agent, I think you got across very well. So, in terms of where are you now? Because with COVID and 19, theaters are closed. What's happening in terms of how can people see the movie, and what are your hopes for it? And has this year been annoying for you as it has been for me? And, to explain something about how you're going right now with the film and what you're doing with it.
Sure. Yeah. The pandemic has been a big bummer. I'm not going to lie. We made this for the big screen. I was really lucky that we did get to do a few festivals in person before the shutdown. The last one being at Santa Barbara, where we won the ADL award. And there's something about a World War II film about seeing it. It's not just seeing it on the big screen. It's actually the sound and the emotion that sound brings to a film, the surround sound, and sitting in an audience, much like a play. And having seen that live, there is a visceral reaction everyone has to watching it together. And so it was extremely disappointing to have that kind of taken away. It did open in theaters right before the shutdown there, and just opened in the UK in theaters, the same in the US. And then the theaters close. And so it is now, and that's the world we live in. All filmmakers are dealing with that right now, frankly. So it's available everywhere. In the UK, it's available, Sky, DVD, Amazon, etc. In the US, everywhere, Comcast, Verizon, again, all the platforms for watch at home. And the only thing I encourage is, as you said, this is, I hate the word old fashioned, but I did make it as an old fashioned film. In other words, the payoff is at the end, and the payoff you have to get emotionally involved in the character's journey for the payoff. And so I just encourage people to watch it in one sitting, because I think in this pandemic world, we do watch things in bits and pieces. And that, as a filmmaker, that's the other tricky thing, when you make a piece of art.
Yeah, and as a historian watching it, the scenes I particularly liked. I mean, particularly and we won't reveal too much for those who haven't seen it, but when Virginia and Vera visit Noor's mother, that was an amazing scene, and yet probably didn't happen, but amazing. I have to ask you something, because I maybe saw something that I completely invented, or I like to think it's something you put in. The umbrella reference, was that something you put in, or was that because Mag said no, you're making it up, because earlier in the film you had Virginia not using an umbrella, and she said, I never, and then later on you had to use an umbrella. Did you put that in, or am I completely making that up?
I did put it in. It's actually in the script, and no one's asked me that so far, so I love that. So in the script, it's a woman who, she won't use an umbrella in the beginning. She's cantankerous, doesn't have any caution, and then as the movie journey goes on, she has her umbrella. She's grown and developed and learned that you can still be powerful but take caution. It's in the script.
Oh, I'm so glad I'm validated there, because Mag was saying no. I said no. I'm sure that's deliberate. I'm sure she said no. I think yes, just
it's
you.
deliberate.
Well, I feel that's made my day. That has. So I'm glad because I watched it with her, and I watched it twice. I watched it once just to kind of enjoy it, and I watched it again, going kind of like, I'll try and make some notes there about different things, and and it will come back to it, that very difficult thing about balancing history with an entertaining drama, and it's a fine line, and it's not easy, and I admire anybody who does this. And the reality is, I mean, I've got half a dozen books on the SOE here, and by best-selling authors, but movies will hit an audience bigger and different to a book audience, and I think anything that highlights what these people went through is amazing. So I know you played Virginia, but was Virginia your favorite character, or did you have a soft spot for someone else?
That's a great question. I actually love all three of them. I don't have a soft spot for any of them. I think the most intricate character in terms of the history, in terms of accessing, is actually Vera Atkins. In other words, there's the most detailed research on who she is, I think. I think Noor and Virginia are a little more enigmatic and more of a puzzle to figure out. I actually fell in love with all three of these women, and I really hope, like you said, that this movie puts them in the history books, because if you actually Google them, they've won every award for honor that you could win, and it's not just about awards, it's just about, they made a difference. They changed the course of the war. And yesterday was Veterans Day and Remembrance Day. And, just as a reminder that there are stories we don't yet know about people who served, and we need to highlight them.
Well, absolutely. Yeah. And, as I'm a Normandy man, I'm a tour guide by normal trade, not in this year, but normally. And, we always try and make a point of saying that the landings are on D-Day by infantry running up beaches with machine guns, and that's all part of it. But also behind the scenes is the code breaking and the agents, and the facts the resistance had given the Allies the maps of what the Germans were building and where the Germans were doing this, and all that complexity that goes behind the scenes. And anything that gets across what those incredible agents did is important to me. And so what would be your takeaway? I asked authors this. One of my favorite questions is that when people get a book, or in your case, see your movie, what do you want them to be their main takeaway from it? Is there a particular thing, or is it several things?
I think there's probably two things. I think the first is that there are all these hidden figures. I call this the hidden figures of the spy world, and to seek out, independent films about history above and beyond your typical studio fare, which is great, but doesn't always uncover the history angle and misses some diverse voices. And then the second thing is, the movies that I like most, you enjoy just while you're watching them, but then you want to watch them a second time, and B, you want to have a conversation about them afterwards, directly about how you feel, you, the viewer. And I hope when people watch this film, they ask themselves the question, what would I do? The world has proven this year that things can get dark at any time in 2020. And if, things got dark for what you believe in, what would you do? Okay, would you go vote? Okay, fine. But would you put your life on the line, knowing you have a 50-50 chance of survival and maybe just 6 weeks to live for a cause? I don't know if I would. I'm a mom. I don't know if I would hope I would. I would absolutely hope I would. But until I'm in that moment, I don't know. And I hope it just encourages us all to explore the lines we would go to stand up for others and to stand up for what we believe in.
Yeah, and I think, I mean, my favorite SOE agent is Violette Szabo, although your film has nearly converted me to respect it. And I'll tell you why. And that's because a number of years ago, I got a copy from Tanya, Violette's daughter, of her book about her mother, Young, Brave and Beautiful, which is in one of my, I've got 1,200 books. It's in my top 5 books. If and when my house burns down, that'll be one of the ones I run out with in my jacket. And the thing that that uniquely happens when you read that book as a male is within a chapter you fall in love with Violette. That's what happens. Is you whether you're married, you start falling in love with this woman, and then you get to the bit where she's successfully done one mission. And then back in England again, she's got a 3-year-old daughter. She goes on a second mission, which is the one on which she gets killed. And that to me, that exemplifies exactly what you just said there about what would I do. In that I think, not that in any way am I comparing myself to the bravery of Violette Szabo, but if I got away with one bit of bravery once, I'd call it quits. I'd say, right, I'm walking away now. And with Virginia, she did it again, didn't it? She got out by the absolute skin of her teeth and then went, okay, let's go and do it again. And that is borderline insanity. And I mean that in a complimentary way. But, you know, your photo has now been known by the Gestapo and the Germans and circulated. And by the time Virginia goes back in with the OSS, I know that you don't cover that in the film. At least you can do a sequel later on. But she's now... This is after the commando order the Hitler's given. The dangers now have gone from being their level to just off, and she goes back in again. And I think that sums up that what would I do? And I know I wouldn't. I just go, no, I'm not cut out. You could put me in serge, khaki uniform. I might go and do my bit, but I'm not gonna put my hand up to volunteer and run over the hill. And so, you know, do you find yourself when you wrote it and you play, do you feel a bit guilty? And I don't, you know, playing someone who was so much better than you. I don't mean you're not a great person.
No,
I mean, you know, I'm not worthy of putting on her hat. I mean, you must have had that moment, surely.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I've certainly had that moment many times shooting. And like you said, Virginia Hall went back again and she escaped Klaus Barbie, who came in to chase her with a wooden leg hiking over the Pyrenees. Then, I mean, this isn't in the film. Then she landed in a Spanish prison because she didn't have the right papers when she got, you know, for months. That would have been enough, right? Like
absolutely, quit while you're ahead. Yeah.
Right? Like, for me, I would have been like, great, I made a difference and I escaped and now I'm going to go home to my family. And she, I mean, you know, by all accounts, those were the happiest years of her life, like making a difference. It was what she was born to do, to lead and to spy and to make a difference for humanity. So yes is the answer to your question there.
Yeah, I mean, and without going, you said it right at the beginning of the psychology behind these people. We all like to think that these people are doing it for, if you like, king and country, democracy. But a part of it is their own desire to make a difference and justify their role to themselves. It's internal, isn't it? It's a need to prove. Forget anybody else. Forget about the fact you're making a difference to the world. It's just that it's getting one over on yourself, proving to yourself. And I see that particularly in Virginia with the wooden leg aspect of it. There's this, you know, if there hadn't been a war, she would have found some way of doing something extraordinary without a war. Surely she'd have been an Amelia Earhart kind of traveling. That's just clearly in her makeup, isn't it? So, you know, but they're tapping into something that we don't have. So next question, perhaps the last one. Would you dive back into World War II again if an option came up for something else? Do you think you're done with it now? Are you going to be one of the, would you go back into the war again or military?
Absolutely. In fact, when I did the CIA panel, they were pitching me a couple ideas of spies in different time frames. You know, I really want to do a miniseries based on this film, and I'm starting to pitch that now because it would allow more in-depth on this world that's not possible in a 2-hour movie. There's so many stories in World War II to be told, and by no means is this the end of me telling them.
Well, that's good to know, because Brian Yee, one of my people watching on YouTube, he was one of the people. He's in Arizona. He saw it at the theaters before they got closed, and he said a sequel gets my vote. He said, so that's, you've got one person, well, two, it's me as well. We'd go and see a sequel. So,
oh, can you just get me like $10 million or so?
Yeah, well, yeah, that's it. Yeah, I mean, it's all about money, isn't it? It's all about, but you know, on behalf of the kind of people who watch my channel, which are lots of kind of history people and writers and authors, and I don't know how many people are watching it right now. But they'll watch it later on in the next couple of days. It is so important that people are tackling these grittier subjects and not just, and not going into the romance thing. I don't think there's been many SOE films in the past that haven't had romance in it. And yeah, I mean, Virginia did eventually live with one of the men she met on the second, the OSS mission, but it would have been a cheap trick, I think, to have kind of invented in the middle of the movie oh no, they've just hit it off and gone upstairs. That would have been a cheap shot, and I'm glad you didn't do that. I can't imagine at any point you were going to go down that route, but thank you for not just turning it into, a syrupy romance, which some of them have done in the past. So yeah, thanks for that.
Yeah, well, this is really about film about individuals who made a difference. And, I just encourage people to watch more films like that about people who made it, real people who made a real difference to the world we live in now.
Well, yeah, and on that note, I think we'll bring this incredible show to an end. And again, for those watching, the links are in the YouTube description below about how you can get to your Call to Spy website, and then you can find out in whatever country you're watching from how you can stream it, download it, buy it, whatever. In terms of myself and what we're doing on World War II TV, I've got a test bit of footage being taken in Volgograd, Stalingrad tomorrow for a Battlefield live stream coming up later this month, which I'm very excited about. I've got Dr. Helen Fry on Saturday for our third part of our Operation Aquatint show about the escape and evasion of agents in France in 1942-43. So maybe Sarah will come back and watch that one as a viewer, because we're talking about stuff that she's interested in. So that's it. As usual, if you haven't subscribed to World War II TV, click the button, click the bell to get the subscriptions. Please consider checking out our Patreon page. And as me, the host, I'm saying, Sarah, thank you so much for joining us. Our little humble YouTube channel, but we're sincere and honest here, and it made me very pleased that you said you liked some of my questions, because that makes me feel good. So thank you very much for contributing. Any final things you want to say about the movie? Any little final plug? Or
just watch it. If you want to see more films like this, people have to click on them. If you like it, watch it and spread the word. And this has been a lot of fun. So thank you for having me.
Brilliant. Thank you very much. Well, I'll end the stream now. Thank you very much. But I'm just going to keep you online a second, Sarah. I'll talk to you just off camera a second. But thank you very much for watching, everybody. I'll see you all again on Saturday for the Aquatint show with Helen Fry. Right. It's just us now. Interesting you said